This is my 2013 Cannondale Synapse. Now when I'm climbing, I'm noticing there's a creaking from this headset assembly, so I'll be changing the bearings. The first job is to obviously drop the front wheel, then you can take off the front brake. It's just a nut on the back, comes off here, this pulls through. It's always a good idea to put the nut back on. You can store that out of the way. Then use an Allen key to remove the top cap. There it is. And then Allen keys to remove the stem tightening bolts. When you've done these, you've got to be careful because the fork might drop through. You can slowly take off the handlebars. Store them out of the way somewhere. Little balance. Right, now you can remove these spacers. This cap, which has got an O-ring on it, so it's a little bit stiff. And then the fork should just pull through. Now you can see there's a compression device there. A bearing which just literally just comes off. And then that's it. There is another bearing here. And also a seal at the bottom just to prevent some water ingress. This is one of the bearings that came out of my headset. You can see on this side there's an angled face, and on this side there's an angled face, and that corresponds with an angled face here. This bearing goes in that way, and then on the top it goes in this way, so there's an angled face here. That's machined directly into the top. The bottom's got a piece of metal that's been pressed in. I've cleaned up the faces and lightly greased those ready for the new bearings. Now the old bearings were quite rough, but I thought, well, I'd see if I could re-grease them to make them better. Now you can get a knife and just slowly prise that seal away. Once you've done, then the inner part of the bearing will come free. And then you'll find this inner race of the bearing will come away. You would need to prise out the ball bearings in this cage, and then you've got access to this bearing face. If you clean that up, clean the bearings up, degrease them, and then repack with grease, and then fit it all back together, you'll probably find that the bearing will be okay, and you can reuse it. In this case, my bearings were quite bad, and they still felt notchy after re-greasing, so I'm going to replace the bearings. Right, now to reassemble. It's just the reverse of the disassembly. First goes the seal, the first bearing. And this bearing goes downwards, so that angled face matches this one. Sits on there. Offer that up. Then you need the next bearing with the angled face downwards. Then the compression device. Clean off some of that grease there. Then this top cap. There's a seal on the bottom there. And then you can replace the washers, stack washers if you like. And then it's just a case of refitting the handlebars. Once the handlebars are back in place, you can set the preload on the bearings. You do this by tightening up the top cap. Now that engages with the star washer within the fork, and as you tighten it draws the fork up, and in doing so it preloads these bearings. Now you just tighten this until all the play is being removed. It doesn't have to be too much. Once that's been done, you just tighten up these two bolts on the stem and that clamps it all together. Then the top cap's not really doing a great deal apart from stopping rain getting down your tube. All the work's done by these two bolts here. Once that's done, just replace the brake, put the wheel on. Just a word of warning about bearings. There are many different types. Now on my bike, these two bearings are identical top and bottom. Sometimes they can be different. More often than not, there's an identifier on the side sort of engraved in. There's nothing on mine, so I've had to go to the internet and do a search to make sure I get the correct replacement bearings for my bike. It's vitally important you get the right bearings. There are some very tiny differences which can make a big difference to how your headset feels. With regard to setting the preload, I fitted the wheel and put the bike on the ground, stood astride it, and then gently sort of adjusted the preload so it felt about right. I could rock the bike slightly, see if there was any play. Once I was satisfied with that, I tightened it up, went for a test ride. Everything seemed fine, so that's the best way to do it. Sometimes a little bit of trial and error. You might need to just slacken these bolts, tighten a little bit more, loosen, just to get it absolutely right. And then that's it, job done.